1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. Wow, I'm so glad I nailed that this week because I am your host, one of your hosts anyway, Joe Mahaffey, and of course I am joined by my good friend
James Engelhardt. Good to be back, Joe.
Hey, James.
And I was excited to you've nailed this thing. Bam, 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 bam. It's good.
I'm just
good. You got this, man.
I'm keeping it written in front of me. I think that is the key. And all of these things is just, I know a skill is developed by repetition, but yeah, there we go. We're just going to keep it up on front of our face while we do this. Well, obviously it's been a while since we've been together because we took Memorial Day weekend off, and I've got some things in the show notes a little bit later to talk about. But gosh, I am really excited to be here in June because we have been anticipating and waiting for this day to get here because, folks, let me tell you, in the year plus that we've been doing this podcast, our dream when we started this was not only to talk about board games, and we really wanted to have some interesting guests. And absolutely up until this point, we've had some really great guests come on here and talk to us from, Nate Bivens in the very beginning. We've talked to Christina Stiles. We talked to
Megan Cannell was awesome.
Megan Cannell. We talked to Richard Fortuna. And of course, we've talked to Professor Dungeon Master. And then last time we were together, we had the opportunity to speak with Linda Cadega. Well, yes. Today.
An amazing. Yes.
Well, go ahead and finish that thought.
An amazing creator and author and journalist. A lot of stuff, a lot of really good stuff about the D&D and OGL. But today, yes.
Yeah, today is where the thing sort of becomes full circle because James and I have talked a lot about from the very beginning about how Wingspan brought us sort of back into each other's lives and kind of said
it brought us together, Joe.
That it did, and I'm very grateful. I'm happy to have you in my life. So a few months back, I had reached out to Jamey Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games and invited him to come on the podcast, and we were able to finally work it out. So James and I actually had the opportunity to speak with him yesterday afternoon, and so what we're going to do now is I want to introduce that interview, and then we'll come back and do the rest of the show. So we're going to head on over to the interview with Jamey Stegmaier from Stonemaier Games. So welcome to the program, Jamey Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games. Jamey, it's so nice to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, so James and I have been doing this podcast for, a little over a year. And, there's a bit of an origin story between the two of us and Wingspan, because although James and I went to college together over 30 years ago at Wofford College, a very small liberal arts college in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we hadn't seen each other in about 30 years. And my wife and I fell in love with Wingspan just prior to the pandemic, and I was very active in some of the Facebook boards, and I made a comment, and all of a sudden I get this message, Joe, is that you? And it was James. And so we have been back in each other's lives and gaming, not only from a D&D perspective, but a board game perspective for, going on 2.5, 3 years. And we started this podcast a year ago. And so we were just so delighted when you agreed to come on our program. So thank you so much.
Well, I love hearing when games connect people in that way. So thank you for sharing that origin story. Yeah, that's really great.
So we have a number of things that we wanted to kind of get into, and I'm going to avoid the whole issue of sounding like a fanboy because I'm going to just say this one time. I just want you to know how much I appreciate you and your organization, because my wife and I, as our kids got out of the house, we rediscovered board gaming just before the pandemic, and if it wasn't for some of your mini games, Wingspan, Viticulture, Tapestry, I could just keep going on. We probably would not have had the interaction that we did. So I just want to thank you for that. So that does kind of lead me into, though, just sort of the how people get really passionately into board gaming. And I'd love to kind of know how you found your way from an enthusiast to a publisher.
Yeah, that's a good question. because I was involved with games just as a kid, like designing games, playing games, but I never thought even as a kid that I would have a game that was published or that I would be a publisher myself. And so it wasn't until Kickstarter became a thing. I was just absolutely enamored by Kickstarter when they launched. For the few years that followed, when I started to see board game projects show up on it, I loved everything about the idea, in particular the idea that I could engage directly with people who were excited about something that I was creating, and vice versa, because I backed a bunch of projects and I was engaging directly with creators. That was really exciting for me. And so I thought I would take this passion of mine for designing games and combine it with this curiosity for Kickstarter. That's when I launched Viticulture back in 2012. Yeah. Do you guys remember your first project? I assume you've backed some Kickstarter crowdfunding projects. Was there one that got you hooked for the first time?
I might need
Scythe.
It was Scythe. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I might need a 12-step program for the number of Kickstarters that I have.
Yeah.
I'm a real late bloomer in that regard, but I have unfortunately I have backed many. I'm like a early backer or whatever they call them now, but yeah. But I missed all the Kickstarters as it related to Stonemaier Games, because by the time I really got deep into the hobby, I had the opportunity to become a champion and get access that way.
Yeah. And I'm still I miss the feel of those Kickstarter campaigns. I like the way that we do it now a lot more. But the big difference now is that we typically make a product and then we announce it and then we ship it a few weeks later. Like it's a truncated anticipation gap.
I love that.
I think for me, it's a better way, I think, to serve our audience, our champions, our non-champions, anyone who wants our games. I think it's a great way to serve them. I wouldn't say better, a different way. But I do miss that excitement around a Kickstarter campaign. So I try to emulate it. Can never quite capture that same feeling, but I try sometimes, or I try all the time. I don't know if I achieve it all the time. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of just chatter and foment and all kinds of stuff that happens during those. And then there's also you posted at one point the click it, forget it kind of thing. Like, okay, now I'm just going to wait for 6 months or a year, and all of a sudden this gift appears in my backyard, and it's woohoo! I'd almost even forgotten about it. So, but I do like the sense that, and I saw this as one of your top 10 lists of how to succeed was to start the Kickstarter as far along in the design process and then fulfill as quickly as possible. And I've always admired companies that do that. So that makes a lot.
I'm glad you noticed that. Yeah, that's been on my mind a lot recently, because I've seen more and more creators launch when the game is still, like, it looks fancy. They almost make it look complete, but they're transparent about it, saying like they haven't finished the design yet. But that to me is like so much. Like I'm working on a game right now that I spent 6 years on, and I thought I would have finished it a couple of years ago. I don't want to put that risk on someone else. Like that's my job to finish the design before I put it out there for other people.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I anticipate the monthly champions update, and I love the graphic that you have in there. I have a project management background, and so I love just to sort of see the workflow and the life cycle of where things are, and when a name goes from a code name to an actual name, and just sort of following that through the process. That's very helpful, because I mean, as we've experienced on the Kickstarter side, the pandemic and the whole supply chain and just sort of availability of manufacturing in China has just really put a damper on a lot of the life cycle, if you will, of creating a Kickstarter game. How has that impacted some of the projects you guys have been working on?
Yeah, so we work with Panda Game Manufacturing, and honestly, we at Stonemaier Games, we're in a bit of a privileged position with Panda because we're a major client of theirs. I know they try to treat everyone as equitably as possible, all their different clients, but I think we do get a little bit of priority sometimes. When we do a reprint of 25,000 copies of Wingspan, it's pretty easy for them to get that into their production cycle pretty quickly.
Well, you've already moved 1 million copies of it at least, so I could see why they would want to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've done the same thing with like Pandemic. They were the major producer for Pandemic for a while. They're able to pump through copies of Pandemic, and so I haven't seen it impact us all that much beyond maybe a few weeks here and there additional time. Most of it was on freight shipping for a while, where we saw freight shipping take a lot longer and be a lot more expensive than it was pre-pandemic. But recently, it's actually gotten a lot better. The prices have dropped. The freight shipping times has dropped. So those lead times have gone down, where that was a big problem for a while.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And so I know we're kind of jumping around here, and I know James has got some questions that he wants to inject into this. But when I think about some of the games that you've put out, and the ones that you're involved in designing, and then along comes somebody like Elizabeth Hargraves, how do you kind of onboard a new designer in sort of that kind of process? Because I'm not really, and maybe this is just ignorance on my part, I'm not really sure that you have another designer in your ecosystem that's quite like her in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with some pretty talented designers. Elizabeth, I think, is probably the most successful of all of them at this point. But we also have worked with the design pair of Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley. They did our Between Two games.
Okay.
They're probably the most famous right now for Search for Planet X. A game that's done very well for another company. They bounce around a lot between different companies, as is Elizabeth.
100%.
But like our general process for onboarding and getting a designer into our ecosystem is if they submit a game to us, that's the start of it. They submit a game to us. My co-founder, Alan, reviews all the submissions and decides which ones we want to actually bring to the table and play test ourselves to see if it's a good fit. And then often there's a little bit of a gap of time where I am sending feedback to the designer almost just to see how they respond to feedback, because just as important as the game is, I want to make sure there's someone that I can work with, that they'll accept some feedback or be willing to try some of it, but also push back and be like, no, Jamey, I already tried that. It didn't work with this group or didn't work for this reason. I want both. I want the yeses and the nos. And once we get past that point, we officially sign the game, we get a contract, we give them in advance, and then I continue that development cycle until through blind play testing and until we were ready to enter production. That's a very bare bones overview, but yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Well, I was a book editor or publisher for 15 years. And so it's a very similar kind of process, right? You've got somebody who's sort of the wide mouth of the funnel. It keeps going. And then, as I told other authors too many times, it's a marriage. You're going to be together for years. If you can't work with each other, get out now. It's just better for everybody concerned. And that ability to handle feedback, yeah, that's 100%. That's a lot of people that's easy to walk away from. Just say, yeah, no, you'll find a home for your book, your game, whatever. That's great. But yeah.
Right.
Well, and just sort of staying in that line, I don't want to spend the whole time talking about Wingspan because we'll be here all day if I do that. But I am curious about a couple of things because James and I talk about this game a lot on the show for no other reason than we both love it and we both play it. But one of the reasons that we've liked it and we've talked about it is that, number one, it's a great gateway game that has this theme that makes it accessible to a much broader audience. In fact, my wife and I teach this game all the time. It's been on our table for the last week just because we wanted to go back to it. But it's also a game that we love because you don't have to be mean to each other to win. And that's a big core component of the way that my wife and I play games. So I'm just kind of curious, when you first encountered this game as a concept, did you have any idea that it was going to be so explosive as it has been from that perspective of bringing new people into the hobby?
No, there were a lot of things I didn't know about Wingspan going into it. Even the very first version of it I saw was a very simple card game. It didn't have a lot of the mechanisms like the player mat, that engine building aspect to it. That wasn't there at all. That was something that Elizabeth and I worked to add to the game. So especially the first version of the game, I had no idea what it would do later. But it has been one pleasant surprise after another, how it's brought people into the hobby, how it really engaged the birding community. I didn't know how robust and active and enthusiastic the birding community was. And I think that's spun off to other news outlets that we haven't usually gotten coverage for. And once that happened, then a lot of people found out about the game. I think there's this beautiful critical mass that certain games hit when, especially the game itself is really welcoming, where it people who don't normally play games end up hearing about this game and might be willing to try it when they wouldn't have otherwise.
Well, I'll tell you one story. When right before the pandemic, we had gone to Colorado from North Carolina for a vacation with my in-laws who were in their early 80s. And I packed a hard shell ATA case full of board games that included Wingspan and Viticulture and a few others from other publishers. And we were able to teach them Wingspan very quickly, and they were not board gamers at all. And then what was so cool is when we were all over Colorado, we kept seeing the magpie. And it was it's just not a bird you see very often here in the Carolinas. And so it was just so cool to kind of share that experience when we're, out having that kind of trip. And then that later for Christmas, we were able to get one of Natalie Rojas' prints and give it to them for Christmas framed as a sort of a remembrance of that whole thing. And so it just was one of those things that keeps on giving in that regard. So that to me was just sort of cool.
That's wonderful.
Cool.
I'm not going to spoil anything here, but we have talked about doing spin-offs of other species of animals using kind of the wingspan formula. And one thing that came up in some of those discussions was, as we discuss other animals, is that birds are unique in that if you look out any window, you'll probably see a bird out there if you look for a few minutes. Whereas that doesn't apply to most other animals. Like, as fascinating as, I won't name the animals here because I'm going to spoil whatever animal it is that we're looking at.
Sure.
For most other animals, you don't have that. So I love that birds are just around us all the time that we take for granted sometimes, but they're there. They're there for us to look at and enjoy and appreciate.
Well, and one of the fun things too is, like, I'm thinking about other animals, like you could do insects, but some people are deathly afraid of spiders, right? And so, there's a lot of other kind of other things up and down the chain of life there that there are fewer people who are afraid of birds. I know a couple of people who are like, but mostly they have enthusiasts like birders and so on who are very much interested. So I'm going to jump back just a second to something that Joe had mentioned about the sort of lack of sort of conflict and head-to-head interaction. And I think that's, from all of the Stonemaier games that I've known and played, that's kind of a hallmark. It's kind of a mark that there's sort of limited. And we're part of our tagline is we're the Southern Board Gaming Podcast with the accent on Southern. If I got that right, Joe. And
way better than I do.
So we think a lot about region, right? Think about our region. I've also lived in the Midwest, in Illinois, Nebraska, Ohio. Been to St. Louis a couple times. It's a lovely city. So the Midwest gets dismissed as flyover country. South gets dismissed for lots of other things. You grew up in Virginia, I recall.
Yep. That's right.
So you know something about the dismissal of both of them. But do you think there's something about this regional identity, these experiences that sort of influence the game design, also the entrepreneurial philosophy? Just feels like there might be stuff there. The customer service is quite nice. So I don't know. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever been asked that before.
Yay!
I bet something. I bet there is something ingrained there in terms of the customer service for sure. Like the way that my parents tried to raise me to be polite and considerate of others. I don't know if it's necessarily due to the region, but it might be somewhat regional. And so, yeah, my philosophy at Stonemaier Games is to serve other people. That's why I'm here. You all are the ones playing our games, enjoying our games. I'm here to serve you. As for the game design, I don't know. Maybe it is somewhere deep ingrained inside of me. That also might just be me as a gamer. You know, every gamer is a little bit different in what they prefer to pursue. There are some gamers that really love those strong conflicts and combating games. Those are the exceptions.
And yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And some of our games have a little bit of that, but like you guys said, I love in Wingspan that you can really focus on building your own thing, your own little collection of birds, and you can admire what other people are doing. And there are interactions. Like, I might take a bird that you from the center row that you might have been eyeing, but I'm probably not doing that to hurt you. I'm doing it because I want that bird in my collection.
It's hard. It's not efficient to hate draft in Wingspan, or hate draft food or something, right? It's just like, no. But even like something like Scythe, and I know that there was a little bit of chatter, like, I thought it was going to be a war game, and it's clearly not that. And so that was all. I love that game for that, though, because you're doing your own little thing, you're pushing people around, you're trying to get, but it doesn't pay off well to go out fighting.
Right. Which is what I hope would be. I mean, that's kind of almost a real world lesson that it rarely pays off to go fight somebody else when you could deal with that in different ways or build up your own thing.
Yeah.
I think the confusing with Scythe, a little bit of my mistake here, a little bit maybe art direction from the artist, is that the box of Scythe shows a battle, whereas almost every other illustration in the game shows like idle mechs or mechs doing farming or not fighting. So I can see why some people maybe are misled by the cover, but if you flip the box over or look at anything else about the game, you'll know right away this isn't a game about combat.
Yep. Yeah.
That's a really good point. I mean, it's, we always say you can't judge a book by its cover. And we see a lot of, I think about the number of board games that I have been attracted to just because of the way that it was put together. Recently, we went down a path of obsession over Garden Bow. and I was sucked into not only the original cover, but also I had to have the wood tiles to really play the game, and just it's amazing how I look at it and I go, oh, my wife Dale, she's gonna like that game. I can tell by the cover; it fits her, her motif, and so that's just part of it. And it was a struggle for her to get interested in Scythe because of the cover. That was kind of where I was going with that, and so I can see how that makes a ton of sense there.
Do either of you, given that you seem to really enjoy Wingspan, do you have, if you introduce it to someone and they come back to you and say, hey, I love Wingspan, what's your next recommendation? Is there maybe a non-Stonemaier game that you recommend to them if you know someone loves Wingspan?
I can go easy on that one. I am my two are Wingspan and Parks. I take people to Parks next because it's that same kind of. In fact, I have this thing, and James has heard me say this countless times. I want to do a marathon with Wingspan, Parks, and Isle of Cats, and the idea is you play it like the cats are chasing the birds into the park. So you play this, you play around here, you play around here, and you play around here until you get done, and you total up all the scores. I've never done that, but I want to.
It's Joe's version of a turducken. Yeah.
But those three are the ones that I really pull out the most for new folks, is because you get so much diversity in that. You get the worker placement into, and then of course the whole polyomino thing of Isle of Cats, and just the fun of rescuing cats is the thing. So those are the three that I typically go to. James, how about you?
I'm trying to think of other Tableau builders with engine stuff, but I think the one that like my wife and I go back to all the time is Cascadia, which is a different vibe, but it also has a similar kind of, the mechanisms are super easy. You just put the things down, and
Beth Sobel artwork. Don't forget about the Beth Sobel artwork.
Right. Yeah, and it's really nice that way. But there's a lot of thinking through it, and there's a lot of more tactics than strategy, right? Because like in Wingspan, if you pin everything on one bird, I don't know what that might be, but if you pin like I have to have one of the crows or something, it's, you don't know what's going to come out, right? So you're always responding to the stuff that's happening. We just picked up Acropolis recently. And had a lot of fun playing that and having a similar kind of, this is very simple. The rule set is pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of strategy, particularly after the first time where you're like, wait a minute, I need to build up, kind of figuring out those sorts of things. So those are two that, come to mind, is that have similar kind of easy to introduce, easy to move people through.
Yeah.
And and also these games where you're having to really think through your resources a lot, because I always like games where you have to think ahead. You can't just play in the current round. I mean, one of the things we love about the Wingspan is, by the time you finally got everything you need that you can do what you want to do, you only have 5 plays, and that is so frustrating. It's like, we want that extra 5th round, and that's so, and we've actually played it before, where you do a 5th round where there's just no end of round goals. You get the first 4 and that's it. And you just play another round and see how that goes, just because we didn't want to stop playing.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about an engine building game, is that it should stop before the engine just shoots out 300 points at you.
Where it pays off a little bit, but not, that's a tough balancing act. With Tapestry has the same thing. It really builds up. You have really powerful turns near the end, and then it's over, and you get any more. So it's tough to figure out exactly when. And with Wingspan, we added that there's a no goal bonus or no goal tile that gives you an extra turn effectively, depending on where it is. The 4 extra turns. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it was funny you mentioned Tapestry. We talk a lot about our favorite local game store, Carolina Tabletop Games. Not a sponsor, I got to say that. But I was in there.
It's local to him, not to me. But
it's local to me, right? I'm Pineville, which is a suburb of Charlotte. I was in there twice over the weekend, and the owner of the store, Rob Ross, he had his little buddies around, and they were playing marathons of Tapestry. It was the game du jour this weekend, which was just a nice surprise. And they were just he had introduced some new people to the game, and one guy was just running away with it like by 200 points or something. It was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big thing, but it was just kind of fun to see that kind of going on. Jamey, one of the things I love about some of your weekly things on the Facebook, and sometimes I guess they're on YouTube as well, is how you talk about your favorite mechanics. I learned so much more about other games that we have or should get, just kind of watching you. And I love that you're so passionate about the industry, that you are so I'm going to talk about games that are not Stonemaier. And that's I love that about you. But I'm just curious, of that today, what are some of your favorite games that are outside of the Stonemaier pantheon?
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, I've learned so much from other designers and publishers. I love to share my favorite things about other games. A few favorites off the top of my head that I am really enjoying getting to the table are, I always love Quacks and Quedlinburg. I'll always be excited to get that to the table. I love Quacks. Dune Imperium and Ark Nova are maybe the two longer games that I really enjoy getting to my table right now. And Earth, even in the Wingspan world of games, kind of the game Earth is very peaceful game. You know, you really have no interaction with other players, but it's really nice to build your own satisfying tableau and build it up, and not just build a tableau of cards, but also put things on those cards so they get better and better. Have you guys played that one yet?
It is on my shrink wrapped wall of shame. I got it for my wife for her birthday back in April, but we have that is a problem that we have, that we'll get games and it's just a struggle to get them out on the table sometimes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But we love Ark Nova. Ark Nova is one of those that, it's almost like and James is always going to correct me on this. It's almost like a Vita Lacerda game. I always say that wrong. and its level of complexity. But once you get it and once you kind of dial into it, a lot of it, sometimes to me, it's kind of like playing some games is a lot like watching Shakespeare. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes before you get into the rhythm of the language. And once you kind of get into the rhythm of the game, we just got the Kickstarter arrival of Darwin's Journey. And that one was a significant learning curve. But once it clicked, it was like, okay, I'm dialed in now. And it was kind of like that same experience with Ark Nova. And once I kind of conflated it or aligned it more so with Lost Ruins of Arnak, it just plugged right in. Like, okay, there's multiple ways you can run up scores. There's multiple ways that you can kind of get to the objective. But it just was it was difficult to kind of get through the brain fog there at the beginning.
Yeah. And James, did you say you've seen Earth but haven't played it yet?
That's correct. Yeah. And I've heard a lot of comparison of Earth to Wingspan for the same kind of tableau building, firing off different. Yeah. So I've been keen to find that. Track it down.
That's going on the table next.
And you two could probably play together on Board Game Arena too, if you're still. Are you separated by a great distance, or do you ever get together and play games?
It's about an hour and a half, two hour plus.
He's in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. It depends on traffic. But we're relatively close. But it's funny. I have actually stayed away from the Board Game Arena because I just so enjoy the tactile experience. Now, obviously, James and I are part of a D&D group, and we're all kind of dispersed, and we do that doing Zoom, very similar format to this. But that's obviously a bit different experience. But we generally try to get in touch in person. But hopefully, we're gonna be able to do that sometime soon because we've got a couple of things on the docket that I'm hoping will either take me to Greenville or bring James up here for like a con or so or something like that we could get out and do that.
You're at a half. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Oh, I was going to say we're at half an hour, so I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I had the same thought about Board Game Arena and digital games, and I still do. But during the pandemic,
right,
at the height of the pandemic in particular, I shifted my weekly game group to online just so we continue to play games, interact with each other. And the joy that I found from it that I didn't expect is that I could play games with people that aren't in St. Louis, people around the world. And so we've continued doing that every other week on Board Game Arena. And then on the weeks in between, I got back to hosting my weekly board game group. So that was I enjoyed that element of it. And they're usually faster. Like I love our 2.5, 3 hour game nights, but also sometimes I just want to play, a 30-minute game and then go back to work or go back to doing something else. And we can do that when we do it digitally.
That makes a ton of sense. It's just for me, I'm involved in technology so much during the week. I think just the ability to be analog, and now part of it is, obviously my wife and I are we play the games the most. Occasionally we're able to convince one of our daughters if they're around to play, but it's kind of gotten to be a ritual for us at the end of the day. We've got I'm in a room that's got a board game table set up all the time on the other side of the screen that you can't see. And we generally we'll pick a game on Sunday and we'll either play it or we'll learn it if it's new, and then we'll leave it on the table all week. And that's kind of gotten to be our ritual, and it's kind of our end of the day kind of stuff. And then then hopefully we try to get out to the board game store occasionally, and we'll meet a couple there, and we'll try to teach them some games. And like there's another couple at our store that's actually want to help us get better at Scythe. And so they're going to kind of lead us and another couple through that. So it's just kind of fun to do that as well.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the Wall of Shame, which in my instance is the board games that come in through Kickstarter or that I pick up for whatever reason that they're still shrink wrapped. Earth, as I mentioned, is one. I've got another one called Rebuilding Seattle, I think it is. Mm-hmm. Do you have any games like that on your shelf that you just haven't gotten to that you really want to, but it's just not, the time is not there?
Yeah, I call it my shelf of opportunity.
There you go.
Rather than shelf of shame. And right now I have Terracotta Army on it.
Oh, wow.
That's been on there for a little bit. And a bunch. And have you played Glenmore 2?
I have.
No,
yes.
I hear good things.
I have that. Yeah, it's a great game.
I love Glenmore 2. I have and Glenmore 2 came with a ton of modules in it.
Right.
I haven't even made my way through all those modules because I even love the base game enough. Somewhat regrettably, I backed the expansion that came with like another dozen modules. Yeah. That's on my shelf. I want to test out a few of them, but it's so many different modules in one game. I don't know if I ever get to all of them.
Yeah, and it's hard to find people that are interested in playing certain types of games. At least for me, maybe it's not so for you, just because of the world in which you're in. But it's sometimes you have a game that's just going to be thematically one way. For example, my wife does not like Root. She's intimidated a little bit by it, so I have to go find other people that want to play Root.
Yeah.
So, James, I'm sorry, I don't want to step all over your.
Oh yeah, no, I had one. I like to ask these weird big questions. It's kind of my role in this. I teach at a local university, and so I sort of live in that kind of world a little bit. So we're talking about playing games and play and things that are fun. So what is it that you find fun in games? What's fun to you about them? Is there fun? I mean, it's a job now, so is there still fun to be had there? And just kind of because I've been watching a lot of your videos recently, is joy part of that? Because you talk about bringing joy to people. So do you think of joy and fun are kind of similar? So just throw that out there.
Yes. Yeah. This is the type of question that I'm not very good at answering. And even in my videos,
it's okay, man. Talk through it. Yeah.
When I talk about my favorite mechanism, I often say the words like interesting and fun, but I'm not very good at like defining what I mean by that when I talk about it. But I have noticed at least one of the things I really like about games, a commonality among games that I really enjoy, and I think this is connected to what I find fun or satisfying or joyous, is, and it's a somewhat nebulous thing, but when a game gives me an opportunity to feel clever, which is, games do this in so many different ways. But when I have that little moment of cleverness in the game, whether the game led me to that moment or just left the door open for me to do something that felt clever to me, that feels really good to me. I really like that. And oftentimes for me, that is an engine building game. When I've made a decision earlier in the game that pays off later in the game, either at the end of the game or repetitively throughout the game, that often makes me feel clever. So I gravitate towards games that have that sense of progression or that sense of engine building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that makes sense for Stonemaier as well, just seeing those kinds of things show up. And is there, it seems like then following on that fun is about that sort of limited interaction, but times when you do take your eyes off from your own player board and look up and see what other people are doing just to keep track of stuff. Yeah.
That is part of it. And I like to admire what other players have built.
Yeah.
I would say 4 games that give me the opportunity to do this. There's one other way that I definitely have fun in games, and that's when I can be a little sneaky. I like being a little sneaky in games. I don't like being a little sneaky in real life, but in games, I like that opportunity. Dune Imperium has those opportunities to be a little sneaky in combat, or whenever you play those intrigue cards. Libertalia, one of our games, has that opportunity to hold over a character from early in the game and then save it and wait to play it until round 3 or the third voyage in the game. That makes me feel a little sneaky. In fact, the whole game in Libertalia is feeling a little sneaky depending on what you play. Yeah. But I like those moments in games where you can feel a little sneaky. Not when I don't want to hurt someone else directly, but when I can be sneaky to the table, that feels good to me.
Yeah. When other people say, "Oh my God, I can't believe, oh man, I did not see that coming." Those sort of moments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah.
Sounds like we're going to have to introduce him to Megan. We interviewed a lady who just wrote a book on tabletop role-playing therapy, and she said she learned a lot about herself by doing things that she wouldn't normally do in public. So maybe you need that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think of like Teen Win. I'm seeing his book right here. Games, Agency as Art argues that games are a way for us to expand and think about agencies. Like they're a library of agencies that we can try stuff on and do something else, and they become an art of agency then. And I think that's I like that more the longer that I think about it. That I can be sneaky. I can decide, I really want to bluff. No, as it turns out, that's not what I really like to do. Bluffing is not something So it's, interesting stuff that way.
Yeah, I like that games provide that kind of low stakes platform to try different aspects of your personality that maybe you haven't explored all that much. Yeah,
and work against it. Like this is how something I never do this, and that's a safe space for you to try to do that and see how it feels.
Totally.
Well, and you, Jamey, talked about and one of your pieces about I thought maybe it'd be interesting to be an entrepreneur, right? 10, 12 years ago when you were thinking about starting Stonemaier, and you went ahead and did it.
Yeah, that was a high stakes gamble at the time. Although Kickstarter made it a little lower stakes. The higher stake gamble was when I quit my full-time job and made this my full-time job. I kind of tiptoed into it, but that was definitely fits into that example there. Yeah.
Well, it really seems to be paying off. Obviously, I don't think we need to go back down that path, but I just love what you're doing. Like the vision friendly cards that came out recently. That's very exciting to see. That's, you're kind of getting into the large print world, I guess. It's funny because my wife keeps a magnifying glass at the table for all the games that we play, just to make sure that she knows what we're supposed to do. But obviously the next big thing coming out of Stonemaier is Expeditions, and I know I for one am waiting for it. I think we're about less than a month away, perhaps. I know I got an email recently confirming the address. So is there anything else on the horizon that you can talk about?
So Expeditions is next. That's for sure. I still have a big pile of Rolling Realms promos that we are revealing. So the ones that we just released are Parks. Actually, I mentioned Parks today. We have a Parks
awesome. Love it.
Skull Hollow and Tricarian. And then we have another 3 coming out at the same time as Gen Con in early August. That'll be the next batch. And then we have one more big game coming out later this year that I can't quite talk about yet. It's actually I made sure that it's off camera. Hopefully you can't see it. It's right next to me on the table here.
I have you zeroed in. No, we can't see it. So I see Firekeep, More, Wild Crow, Lost Bone. Is it one of those?
It's one of them. Yeah.
See, I gave you a plausible deniability there. No, that's great. I mean, it's just one of those things where I have put you in the same quadrant of my life as the Dave Matthews Band. It doesn't matter what they've put out. If the album's out, I'm buying it. Doesn't matter what game you put out, I'm buying it. So
that's quite an honor.
That's worth a T-shirt, man. I don't know. Dave Matthews of board gaming. That's it.
Well, he's got one. It's Chickapig.
That was a Dave Matthews game?
Really? It's a friend. From what I understand, it's a friend of Dave Matthews, and it's my understanding that he helped get it published. That is my understanding. Someone told me that. I haven't fact-checked that, but I have heard that Chickapig is a Dave Matthews adjacent game. How's that?
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
All right.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. Well, I know you promised us 30 minutes, and we're pretty much at that point in time. Before we conclude, is there any last comment or question that you might have for us?
I've really enjoyed talking to you today. I guess you asked me about what's on my shelf, and you mentioned Earth. Is there anything else that's on your shelf of opportunity, or wall of opportunity, or wall of shame, if you want to call it that you are really excited to get to the table, or that is coming soon that you're excited about?
Well, go ahead, James. I was
going to say, right in the other room, I'm going to walk out of this meeting. My daughter is here, and we're going to start playing Flamecraft. So,
cool.
Looking forward to
beautiful game.
Yeah,
we love.
It should be a lot of fun.
Flamecraft and Dog Park last year were our versions of the really exciting games. But it's interesting. I don't know if I have one on my we've already sort of talked about it, but one that I have played recently that was kind of in that vein was I got the reprint of the Castles of Mad King Ludwig, not the super large print, but the big deluxe thing. And my wife and I, we kind of worked into that first with the base game and then added all the expansions. And so we really got a lot of enjoyment out of that particular game. Although she was very frustrated that she could not build a room up next against the the moat situation because it messed with her score. So if we ever get anybody from Bezier Games on, she's probably going to want me to complain about that. But no, that's kind of where we are. I was thinking I was going to get Rebuilding Seattle on the table next, but now I think we're going to move it over to Earth. I think that's you've talked me into that.
I think Earth is pretty easy to learn too.
Cool.
So yeah, hope you enjoy it.
Well, Jamey, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon and having just this conversation. We look forward to seeing what all that Stonemaier puts out in the future, and hopefully our paths will cross again. So we look forward to talking to you sometime in the future.
Joe, James, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to hearing more episodes of the podcast.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Boy, that was a great interview. That was just, he was such a great guy to talk with, really accessible, really forthcoming. Well, except for the teasers he wouldn't share with us, but Well, it's interesting, because it was funny. I can't remember if we talked a little bit. I hope we don't go all fanboy here, but it's just really not, he comes across in his videos and everything I've seen him in is just an extremely nice and polite person. And I think that's exactly what we encountered. And it's just nice to see here's this individual who is a pioneer and a trailblazer in this industry and just sort of has, the right focus on things. So I really enjoyed that interview, and I hope we can have him back at some point in time if we continue to grow this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, it was kind of fun because I'd watched and seen a bunch of his videos, and it was just a different experience to interact with him two-on-one, whatever, with that same background and all of it was like, oh, wow. Hey, there you are doing the thing. Yeah. Well, but he was super, again, he was really engaging, and I thought he brought a lot of great energy to the interview. And he was just a super nice guy.
And, I think one of my favorite parts of it was when you and Jamey connected the parallels between game publishing and book publishing and the interaction that you have with the designer. And I think, one of the things that we really easily lose sight of is that a board game is one of those that takes a village kind of moments to bring that to fruition, because you need obviously the game designer to come up with the concept of what is the mechanic that is going to be intriguing enough to make the game interesting. And then how do you overlay the right kind of theme on that? And how do you find the right artist that really brings that theme to life and really, sells it? I mean, we've said many times that the legacy story with Elizabeth Hargraves is that she liked birds and she liked spreadsheets, but it's the artist that made the cards such an iconic thing that really, breathed additional life into that idea, which I think was just so interesting. And I thought, his comment about the artwork on the cover of Scythe,
yes, being slightly misleading.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting because
that makes sense. And I think it was interesting too that, like what you were saying, that when Hargrave first pitched Wingspan, it was just a sort of basic card game, and they spent, it sounded like, at least a year, maybe two even, really, if you will, fluffing it up. Well, as birds will do, fluff, fluff, fluff.
Yeah,
but to make it a really as compelling a game as it is, and that's, I was talking about the way that back and forth in any kind of publishing is kind of it's a long-term relationship, and the fact that she was open to that feedback, and it felt like it was a really great relationship between the two of them, back and forth to build the amazing game that it is.
No, that's fair. And I think, it's interesting too, because when he was talking about that, I have Tussie Mussy, which is one of her card games.
Right.
And it is a really nice card game. But it kind of makes me wonder if that's obviously that's a pocket game. I don't think that's necessarily what she had in mind with the birds, but it kind of makes me wonder, how much of Tussie Mussy may have come out of that early card game experience. So it just, left you a lot.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, well, that's great. Well, hopefully we can have him back. And folks, we have other guests that we're reaching out to and have tentative commitments on, and we're not going to pre-announce them because, things happen. People's schedules change and such. So we'll just keep heading forward with hopefully these great stories. And again, thanks to Jamey Stegmaier for coming on and spending some time with us. We really enjoyed it.
That was awesome.
So let's get into news and notes. Yes. I'm going to keep pushing this. Our good friends at Games for All Events, Richard Fortuna, is putting on Mythicon again, the Charlotte, North Carolina Gaming Con, this coming November 10th through the 12th in Charlotte, North Carolina, at the Hilton University in North Charlotte. So want to keep that on everybody's radars. There's an opportunity to come and play some games and meet some gamers. And I think he's got some special guests that are going to be there. And you can find all about it and register today. Badges are available now for Mythicon Charlotte at gamesforallevents.com. And as usual, it will be in the show notes below. So, not a ton of news and notes for me this go around, but I did
summer.
Yeah. Yes, it is. But I did not want the passing of June 10th to go by unrecognized. On June 10th, as what I understand, I think this article I have up here is actually a little bit before that. Warhammer 40K previewed the 10th edition guide and began to get some pre-rules out there. I don't think they have the full content out yet, but there's a lot of play testing going on. And I was in the friendly local game store this week and was talking to a young man also named Rob, who is sort of the Warhammer aficionado, and he's still trying to sort through the new rules and see how they play out. But from what I can tell, and some of the conversations I had with them previously, this is really designed to kind of create a little bit more accessibility to bring more folks into the game. So we'll see how that pans out. So
that's what I had heard as well. So that's good to, it'd be nice for them.
Yeah, I think so. And honestly, obviously I'm, as we've talked about, that's really not a game that I have been necessarily into. And I kind of feel a little bit of a pull, but only because I read about Warhammer Old World. And I don't know if you've heard about that, where it's going back to that legacy of the cavalry, the soldiers that you might have seen in the 19th century, early Napoleonic time frame, that were the kind of games that Gary Gygax and those guys were playing up in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin back in the early days. And I think that to me might be a little bit more interesting. I'm not as intrigued by the apocalyptic mech tech, kind of stuff that rolls into the current.
I've had
iteration.
A student over the last couple of years who was very much a Warhammer guy, so I got to get doused. I don't know, just overwhelmed with it a bit.
Sure.
And it's, once you get into it, you're really into it, and because it's, as somebody pointed out not too long ago, it's kind of two hobbies in one, right? Yeah. There's a bit of wargaming, and there's the miniatures and the painting of miniatures and the care and feeding of miniatures. So you got two different things going, and it looks super fun if you want to just blow a bunch of stuff up. I know that there's more complicated, that I don't want to seem like I'm reducing it to just explosions, but
that's like saying that D&D is fun if you just want to be a murder hobo.
That's murder hobos are good.
Yeah. Okay, just checking.
But yeah, and so it's interesting. One of the things he complained about to me consistently over the last couple of years was that there's a huge barrier to entry. Just the rules themselves are just too big. And so hearing that they are, because it seems like it's a fun game. It should be a fun game.
Yeah.
It should be a lot lighter, it seems like, than it has evolved. So I'm interested in this reset too, to see what they do with that.
Yeah. So I think it'll be a good thing. And obviously anything that brings new people into game stores, we talked a little bit about that with Jamey, about how Wingspan was a theme that brought new people to game stores. Yep. And if there are other designers and other mechanisms out there to bring more people into the hobby, that's a great thing. So I'm all for it.
I also love the idea that Wingspan was also going into other stores that weren't game stores, the wild, the Parks any place that had like wild animal stuff, they're like, oh yeah, we want a board game that's got. So that's
it's funny you mentioned that, and I wish I had thought of this when we were talking to Jamey, but there is a bird store near our Trader Joe's here in Charlotte off of Ray Road. That is, I don't remember the name, but they have like bird seed, bird houses, and all these kinds of different things.
Sure.
And we put it on their radar, and they started carrying it in that store as well, just as a way to kind of.
Nice. You should have mentioned that to him. He would have
completely
sent you a free T-shirt or something, man.
You were really lobbying hard for me to get that free T-shirt. I have like 3 Wingspan T-shirts in my closet. So
that's right.
Certainly, I need more.
You should have. Yeah, that was a bit of a good. Missed opportunities.
We're not asking for free stuff. Now, if people send us free stuff, absolutely,
we're not going to ask for it.
No. We cannot be bought, but we can be manipulated. So
yeah, absolutely.
I think you've been. I think you've been manipulated at least twice. Anyway,
you've got this thing about Reddit here.
Yeah. So, and I don't really know if this fits for our the topic of our podcast, but I was looking at this about 6,000 plus Reddit communities have gone dark in protest, and I know some of those are gaming communities. I use Reddit a lot, less with games, more with a lot of my IT stuff, but I definitely use it a lot in 3D printing. There's a lot of great resources on Reddit for 3D printing, particularly in the Anycubic community as well as in the Cura community. Cura being a software, Anycubic being a platform. And I just thought it was interesting, because this, Reddit organization is basically trying to monetize their APIs based on the number of interactions, is from what I understand. And what that's basically doing is creating a cost prohibitive platform, because somebody's Reddit, the way that they're structured with the API, could have over 20,000 interactions going on. Or more, that just created an unsustainable business model for somebody who's like a single person with some sort of a cottage industry with their Reddit or how they're interacting with Reddit. So anyway, it's become a thing. We'll see how it breaks down. I just thought it was interesting because all these Reddit platforms went dark for about 24 to 48 hours. And I did notice that one of them was one that I typically frequent in the 3D printing space. So that, in my mind, made it newsworthy in a light week, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. And I think it really comes down to the fact that a lot of free content out there is becoming unsustainable as being free. Mm-hmm. And ad revenues right now are just not exciting for, a lot of these, what I would consider social-ish, not socialist, social-ish channels. And so we're kind of seeing a reset there. And I think you're also seeing it with, Disney pulling all that content off of Disney Plus and Hulu and different things. So I think there's going to be sort of a reset. And for those of us, and I think this does impact the gaming community, that rely on certain platforms to get content and be better gamers, we'll just keep an eye on it, see how it impacts it. For me, one of the first places I go when I'm trying to figure out a new game is YouTube, because somebody's typically put a video out on how to play it. Whether it's Rodney Smith at Watch It Played or, the 3-minute board games down from New Zealand, which I love those folks, because I love learning a game in 3 minutes because I want to get on the table and play.
Sure.
Anyway.
Well, this is why I support. I've been sending BGG money since 2007. So, yeah. Yeah.
And I started doing that this year because, quite honestly, I didn't even know that you could until you pointed it out. So, maybe they need to put it above the fold. I don't know. I'm sure it's probably right there in plain sight.
They do their big push at the end of the year. So but
it's important. It's important to a couple of bucks. That's why there are a few things that I support on Patreon for that very reason, because I use their services. I listen to stuff and I'm like, I should back them on Patreon. This channel does not have a Patreon. I don't know if we ever will. If we ever get to a point where we felt like that was relevant, we probably would. But you can buy us a cup of coffee if you go to layitonthetable.show. It's right there on the front of the website. If you're ever interested in buying James or I a cup of coffee.
Be awesome.
We don't have a lot of expenses with this podcast, but there is one where that is the layitonthetable.show website. So any help, we would gladly help to defray that cost.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on away from the news, unless you have any news or notes that
Nope, I'm all good. Let's keep going.
Let's jump into what is on the table. And so, James, let's start with you.
Man, let's see a couple of things. Just it's been a slightly slow, but but we've also had a gap. So Laura and I managed to play Furnace, which was a happy little game from a year or so ago. It's still fairly new.
I need you to tell me about that game because I see it in the game store.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, it's kind of like, how am I judging this book by this cover?
Well, no, it's a fantastic game. Sat down with Laura to play it, and she was like, "Oh, this, it just hit all of her, just hit all of the notes quite well." And it was funny because when we were talking to Jamey, he was like, "So, what are some other tableau builders?" I was like, but Furnace would have been one, and it's a pretty simple tableau. You really just have a string of cards that you're going to do. The thing that I really love about it is you've got this little auction mechanism, and you've got 1 through 4 little cylinders that you're putting out there, and there are some basic rules for you can't have 2 of the same number, and you can't have 2 of your own number, and the first time you go into the auction, you're like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, this is fine. And then the second and third auctions, you're like, oh, you bastard. Okay, no, I want, and if you don't win the card, you get the benefit that it has a sort of an action thing at the top, and you get what it does. If you win the card, you don't get that, like the resource that it gives you. You get the action, which is probably awesome, but maybe you really just wanted the stuff at the top because that would feed the rest of your little engine. Except nobody outbids you. So you don't get the resource, you just get the card. You're like, I don't want the card. So it has these lovely little tense moments of, I want this, but I don't want it that much. And I want you to want it more, but you're not picking up that I want you to want it more. And then it's this nice little tableau. And there's a mean version of it where you have to lay the cards out in exactly the order as you get them. And you can only then fire them off in the order that they are, left to right. But we played a friendly basic game where you can rearrange them so you remember what you want to do in what order. And it's a nice little tableau. And the 2-player version of this with the auction works fantastically well. There's a little dummy player that is actually quite frustrating, which is perfect. It's what you want. So super fun. We had a great time playing. We'll get that again soon. Any are there follow-up questions?
No, it sounds interesting. Like I said, I've seen it in the game store, and I think the title kind of was like, I don't know if sometimes the title will cause you to, or cause me anyway,
sure, to
pull it off the shelf and look a little closer to it, or closer at it rather, and it just was one of those that the artwork did not draw me in, I guess.
And the artwork spoke to me. I was like, I love that sort of turn of the 20th century kind of look.
And so I think that was part of it. I think that it just needed to, I don't know, draw me in a little differently. Perhaps. I don't know. It just was one of those things that I was, but now that I see it on your list, I will pay attention next time I take a closer look at it, because it's interesting. I was in the game store this week, and there was a game that actually did attract me just by its look on the shelf, and it's called The Chronicles of Avel.
Okay.
The New Adventures, and it's by Rebel Studios, which is the same publisher that brings us Meadow and the Meadow expansion.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So it's got that, that Eastern European art and production feel, which is a little bit different right now in the gaming space. And so it looks to be like a co-op, and I won't get into that unless I pick it up or get an opportunity to whatever. I'll put it into my intrigued list here. But that's an example of something that does sort of attract my eye, I guess, is what I would say.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, and one of the interesting things about Furnace is it's in a fairly modest little box. There's a big game in a little box. And similarly, Oh My Goods, which is a terrible name. And this goes back, man, I want to say 10 years, maybe 2015. Yeah, so 8. And it's a tiny little box. It's the size of a Colorado box, or The Mind, or so something like that, right? Just a little sort of double deck card kind of box. And it is such a big game for such a small box. It is an absolutely astonishing little game where you've got multi-use cards, and you're building a little engine of sorts, but it's not too complicated, and you've got workers that you can assign, but all the workers are cards as well, and you can fire off, a very limited number of buildings. If they work out well, you stack your cards up and pay them anyway. Super interesting, very compact, really intriguing little tableau worker placement, multi-use card kind of a game. It's the sort of game where you're thinking to yourself, well, should I keep this card and try to play it, or should I just burn it and spend it as money for this other thing? And I love those moments where, like, I can try to build this building, or I can spend it as money to support this other building or to get this other thing. And so there's a lot of game in a very small box, all just cards. Absolutely terrible title. But that's awesome. And I think probably long out of print at this point. I'm guessing it's probably hard to get a hold of. No, apparently you can go to Noble Knight or Card House, and it is well worth looking at. It's a super slick little game. And again, in a very small, it's one of those ones that if you're thinking, well, we're going to go to the beach and I can bring Cascadia and I can bring Wingspan, and that's all, those are good, but those are the two only big boxes that I can bring. So I'll bring Oh My Goods because there's a whole lot in a very small box. Or if you're traveling by air and you're like, I want to bring a couple of games, Oh My Goods is going to have a lot of game again in that very little box, and you'll feel good. Like, okay, we're alone in the hotel room. It's the end of the day. Let's do this. It'll be good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. By the way, we're getting just a little bit of digital blur with your voice.
Okay.
I don't know. It's more internet, I'm sure. We'll see if the backup plan in the cloud is going to work for us, and I'll fix it in post.
Okay.
But no, that sounds really interesting. And of course, I see you've got some other things on here that I wonder if they're on here because of the visitors that you have at your house.
Well, Acropolis is a newish game, and that's a nice little tile laying game that also has a 3-dimensional aspect to it, which is super fun. And really, it feels a bit like Cascadia, but with 3 dimensions to it. And then, of course, my daughter is here. Thank you for the setup, Joe. And she's going to start high school in September, late August, something like that. And so high school drama is very much a throwback game here. I mean, you thought Oh My Goods was a while back. This is why you have me on the show, Joe. This is why we're here. I've got, high school drama from 2006.
Wow. Wait. You have a game that's older than your daughter?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Oh, man. Yeah. I also have a copy of Go. So there's...
Well, fair. But
yeah,
it's more about high school drama.
Yeah. What?
I said it's more about when you bought it.
Yeah. No, it's... well, and I bought it because when it came out, it was kind of pitched as there's an older game called Illuminati that builds these cards, and you lay out your card tableau and you build these connections between the cards. And then at some point you're trying to get rid of these connections for points. And Illuminati is based on conspiracy theory, paranoia. High school drama is built on clicks and paranoia.
Conspiracy theory and paranoia. Yeah.
And so you build up over the first couple of years, and then you get a chance to burn your relationships to get more signatures in your yearbook, and then sail off into college.
That's awesome.
It is a super fun, silly, very silly. It has a notoriously bad rule book, and you kind of have to make up probably about a tenth of the rules yourself because it's just not clear. So yeah,
that makes sense.
That was super fun.
That tracks.
Yeah. And I mean, it was 2006. I think rulebook editing had not reached a high point at that point. So, but yeah. And then because Sky is leaving on day after tomorrow, we had an early Father's Day. And so Flamecraft was an early Father's Day gift. And so we've played that now twice in 2 days. It is, as you know, Joe, a really nice kind of introductory, lightweight worker placement game that's just delightful. The art, the puns, it's a super cute and hilarious game to play. And there's a really nice game at the heart of it.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very generous game. There's a lot of worker placement that can feel pretty punishing. Like, you don't get this, you don't get that. Bad things can happen. Flamecraft is like, no, have more. Have more. And it's still a lot of, there's more of a race feeling than of a tactic strategy kind of thing, but it's a super delightful game.
Well, as you know, we had it at the beach last fall and, fell in love with it then. And I think that it was interesting because I think we were playing with a couple of preteens because I had my cousin, my wife's cousin's children. You're a Southerner. You can follow that.
I was going to say, yeah.
So we're with us and just watching, playing with them. And I was like, oh, this is a great kids game. And then the more we played, I was like, this is not just a kids game. There is a lot to this. And in fact, it was interesting. And it wasn't too long ago. I was in the game store. It was one of our normal painting weekends, but we decided we wanted to play games and they wanted to learn Flamecraft. And I brought it in to play, and I realized that I hadn't played it in a while. And you know how sometimes rules can elude you.
Oh, yes.
So it was kind of fun to just, number one, remind myself of the rules, but also get back engaged. And we had somebody in the store that I knew that also knew the game, and that was also very helpful.
Yep.
So anyway.
And we've just started the basic stuff. We haven't done the companions. We haven't done the gold enchantments. But there's still we played yesterday. It was nice. It was fun. We were all pretty clustered together. And then this morning, Laura and I were out running errands. We're like, okay, but what about more of the fancy dragons? What if you went for that? What if you went for more of fewer of the coins and so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff to think about and aim for. And this is a super fun little game but still pretty light. I mean, I think it's an easy one, and because it's so forgiving, it's a good one to set down in front of preteens, for instance. Yeah,
and it's very accessible, and like Wingspan, it's one of those games that I think it takes a motif that is typically you would find in the game store Dragons, and it kind of reimagines their purpose and draws you in, and the artwork is so fantastic that
it's very Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, and it makes it very accessible to all the different age groups. And I think because I think we've talked about this previously, but for those who may have missed that episode, the way that this game came about was the artist that does the dragons. She's a very well-known artist in the game space and illustrations and such. I'm trying to see if I can pull up her name fast enough since I brought it up. I'll take a look at that.
Sandera Tang.
Thank you. And she was putting these little doodles on Instagram, and the other designers, I think it's Manny.
Yep.
Yeah. Manny Vega.
Manny Vega.
Saw the Instagram, was like, hey, we should make a game, and it just sort of started there, and the whole concept started with, what if dragons were helpful? And so I love that because it's that same kind of interaction between the artist and the designer, which I thought was just fantastic.
Oh, it's super cute.
Yeah, that's great. Whoops. I keep doing things that are going to mess up our little broadcast. For those of you who just watched James kind of go off kilter, it's because I'm pushing things on my Mac I shouldn't push. Okay. That's for those of you who actually watch this as opposed to just listen. So for me, it was pretty light. since we've been together, just because, we tend to get something on the table and leave it. And we just keep coming back to it. And there's been a lot going on over the last month since we've been together. Nothing dramatic, just stuff to do, And so I think we started with Cascadia for a while. Because that was, you had just gotten through going through the marathon with it a couple of weeks, and it reminded me that we haven't played it. And I think it's, we kind of fall into this trap sometimes where, we want to play a game at the end of the day, and we get into the, I don't know, what do you want to play? I don't know, what do you want to play? Back and forth. And that doesn't really, lend itself to it. And so we've just kind of have to pull it off the shelf. So that was kind of a nice thing to kind of remind us, let's get Cascadia out. And we played it a few times, and Dale wins a few, I win a few, and that's always nice. And then so we put that away and decided.
Man, Laura is just the queen of Cascadia, and if I can take a game off of her in Cascadia, it's like it is an incredible victory. I watch her like a hawk, trying to figure, as it were, red-tailed hawk, watching like what she does and how she imagines and sees that game. Yeah.
So my strategy is always salmon. I get more mileage out of salmon and moose. The plural of moose is moose, I believe.
That is correct.
Yes. So I get a lot of mileage out of those. I did get some mileage out of a few hawks. Mm-hmm. But she does amazing things with keeping terrain coherent. Yeah, and that's my weakness.
Yeah, and mine as well. And she crushes me. So this is why I follow her very carefully.
Well,
but it seems like you had another.
Well, before I go to that one.
Oh yeah. Sorry,
because you just it's all good. You just said something that reminded me. The thing about Cascadia is I also think of, we both have the game Fjords.
Oh yeah,
and there's I think Beth Sobel did both.
Yes, I think that's correct.
And it's just amazing to me, there are some similarities in terms of the tile placement between those two games, but it's also interesting to me in Fjords how you can always put something together and it just works. You never have a tile that doesn't fit. And I think about it's almost like a repeating pattern of wallpaper. It kind of makes you wonder.
There's a lot of math.
How much? Yeah, exactly. And I think that's true with Cascadia as well, because although, part of it is trying to get it to fit is one issue, but when you do have the ability to make it fit if you have a spot, unless you're just blatantly being ridiculous. But I will generally figure out, which habitat or which environment I want to be the most prevalent, and I kind of go that route. Just because it makes sense. But sometimes it's just the luck of the tile.
Oh, it is. Well, and I have found that if you neglect one, that sort of 1 point environment is a very bad thing.
Yeah.
You still have to find a balance among. Yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff, and which reminds me, Cascadia, Acropolis feels like Cascadia in 3D because you can build up.
Okay.
And it's very similar in this is simple. And then you get about 2/3 of the way through your first game and you're like, this is not as simple as it seems. And there's just a lot of fun stuff to explore and discover as you play it. So Cascadia is fantastic.
Well, the other game that we talked about was big surprise.
I know, never heard of this.
Wingspan. Yeah. So, obviously we knew we were going to be talking to Jamey, and so I wanted to kind of have that feel of the game and just refresher of what we loved about it. And so we actually pulled out the original edition. We took all the expansions out, and that is still our favorite flavor of Wingspan, I think. And I think one of the reasons is that there's a lot more strategy to it, because the bird feeder giveth and the bird feeder taketh away in that environment.
Yeah.
And it's, do you run to get the cards in the forest so you can get access to the food, or do you play some other strategies? And so Dale and I have played it a lot over the last week or so, and she's won a few and I've won a few. She won more, I think. She definitely won more in the beginning because it takes a minute to kind of get your legs back. But it was interesting because, just playing that idea of I'm going to keep all 5 birds and just start with no food, or I'm going to do this or that and the other thing. And so, and we finally came up with a decent routine to figure out what the end of round goals are going to be.
Okay.
So anyway, it was just a really nice experience to revisit the game and, just sort of remember what we loved about it. And it's funny too. We've discovered that we play it relatively quickly. We can get it knocked out in a 2-player game in about less than an hour. And, given the way that it's lighter longer and we got stuff to do, that's been great.
Yeah. I like, yes, playing Wingspan with Laura, we can definitely knock that down in 45 minutes or so, or less.
So, So let's
awesome.
Let's jump into Kickstarters and game founds and backed and intrigued or just picked up. You've got a few on here, my friend.
Yeah, well, we had talked, I think the last time you had noted that Sanssouci, that I had talked about playing a couple of times, is coming back out.
Right.
But coming to the USA, it says, finally. I didn't know that it wasn't available in the US because I bought it in the US years ago. But they've got a new Kickstarter version of it. I think I'm not going to kickstart it because I have all of the things already. There's a wild boar expansion that I don't have, but I don't feel like my life is incomplete without it. So, but it is a fantastic little game. Did win the Spiel des Jahres, and I recommend it as a very light, family-friendly, tile-laying, puzzly game. It's super fun. But we all know that. The one that I saw come up at a couple of, emails from Board Game Geek is Qing Tian, the Legend of Immortals Killer. So the problem with Qing Tian is that it is not made for English speakers. And so there's a lot of translation that happens. The Legend of Immortals Killer, for instance, right there. And all of the pieces, when you see the images, all of the writing and all of everything is in Chinese. But what's amazing about this is that it's a set of pop-up books.
Oh, wow.
That become the combat stage for your immortal killers. And so as you pop open the books, they have some other pieces that you can put in, but mostly it's just different terrains based on opening up this book and then playing your little standees out, and you've got cards to play and this and that. But it is absolutely an astonishing concept that I have never seen before. And I just thought it was well worth drawing attention to this extraordinary imagining of how to build 3D terrain with pop-up books. That was super fun to see.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I only have a couple. I put the first one in here because we just went through Memorial Day.
Oh, right on.
And Company of Heroes is a board game based on a video game. It's miniatures based. It's kind of like Warhammer in the sense that it's a dice-based game. There's a reprint that's out there on GameFound and Kickstarter right now. You can late pledge, and that's really more of my interest because I was, as you know, I was a history major in college.
Yes.
World War II is one of the reasons why I was a history major, and what I mean by that is my dad served at the very tail end of World War II. In fact, he joined the Navy the day in August that the Japanese surrendered. He always said it was because of him, but he still served at the tail end and went to Pearl Harbor and served in the Navy. And so growing up, we were introduced to the Patton movie and a bunch of World War movies from that era, and so that was really what intrigued me and why I loved, got into and loved Risk as a kid. And so this one really speaks to me. in that regard. So I thought that was interesting, and that's it's kind of like a Warhammer-esque kind of thing, but it's World War II, and so you can play as the Americans, you can play as the Germans, you can play as the British, the Russians, and a few other kinds of things. And it's you can start small or go big, and it just looks really intriguing.
Yes.
So my friendly local game store in Pineville, Carolina Tabletop Games, not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor.
I just like doing that. Has a new in-store copy of Ark Nova that you can play if you want to go in and just play the game. The reason that they have this now on their shelf is I was in there last week and I saw this game I want to talk about, Blood and Plunder, Raise the Black. Mm-hmm. And it was on the top shelf. It's a beefy game. It's a beefy box. And as I was taking it as I was grabbing it off the top shelf to take a look at it, the Ark Nova on the end fell off onto the floor and put a big gash in the front of it. And, yes, I did it. It was not my fault because I did not put the thing on the end. But anyway, so they ended up making it an in-store copy for people to play, which I'm excited about. I'm not excited about how it happened. But I'm just like I'm intrigued by the World War II thing. I'm also intrigued by pirates.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if this is a game that I would want to get into too much, but it definitely is interesting to me. And evidently Blood and Plunder is a well-known brand. This is just like the pirate version of it. I don't know. Okay. I had just seen this and I kind of did a quick look around on it. But anyway, I just wanted to say I'm intrigued. So I will leave it there.
That looks super fun, yeah.
And of course, since we talked about it earlier, I put the Chronicles of Avel in here as well, since we talked about it. So picked up, I have Gloomhaven.
Excellent. All right. Congratulations, sir.
I got a story on this.
Oh, good.
So, I told you guys a while back how I was able to get the Frosthaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I'm a bit of a completionist.
You are.
Yeah. So I had bought sometimes Amazon will have, will resell something that is like new that somebody bought and decided they didn't want it and they sent it back.
Okay. Oh, right.
Yeah. So I bought one of those that was like the top level. So I was like, okay, everything should be there and all this good stuff.
Right.
And it showed up on my doorstep, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. The night we last played D&D is actually when it arrived.
Okay.
And it's like the gorillas everywhere in the shipping department had gotten a hold of the box and tossed it around, and they had put it in this box that was way too big for the box that was inside. It was not tight. Yeah. And so I get this thing, and it's you open it up, and the inside box just like fillets open because the corners are shredded,
Ouch.
And I was so disappointed, and I was like, I'm just going to return it and get another copy.
Sure.
But our friends at the Smiley place said, you know what, just keep it. We'll refund your money and you can order another one, or you can order something else. Because I think they know how heavy it was and they didn't want to pay for shipping to come take it back.
That's fair too. Yep.
So the contents in it seem to be okay.
All right.
The board is trashed, or the box is trashed rather. The box is trashed.
Yeah.
I may work on some tape or something to try to fix it. I did reach out.
I have experience on how to rebuild boxes.
Okay, well
I can give you some tips.
We might need to talk about that because I did reach out to the publisher and requested a box that I would happily pay for,
Right.
But unfortunately, of all the spare parts that they have for that game,
box
is not one of them. So anyway, so I got it basically for free.
Oh, wow.
Because they refunded my money. Now,
that's a hell of a price point. I mean, it's beaten to hell, but still, that's a great price point for Gloomhaven.
Yeah. So I'm leaving it in the box here until I kind of figure out how I want to unpack it all.
I can give you, again,
I've got some tape kind of holding it together that I don't think
tape is not what you want to do. There's a way to get heavy cardstock and glue it to the inside.
Oh.
and I can talk you through that at some point. But it pulls it together from the inside, which is kind of what you want.
Yeah.
And then 100%. A little more glue on the seams to give it a little outside stability. But I used to do, so I would get games at like old 3M and TSR stuff at Goodwill. And so I made a little study of how to rebuild boxes that have been beaten to shit. So yeah.
Oh, noted. Okay. Well, good to know. Well, maybe we'll do that, and maybe we can do a video on it. And you can teach us all how to do it. How's that?
There's actually videos out there too that I learned from as well. But yeah.
So I know we've gone by the time we get with the interview with Jamey, we're going to be a little bit over time here. But I will tell you, I did back a couple of things that are in the 3D print world.
I saw that.
I backed this one thing on Kickstarter called the Haunted Mansion, which was really inexpensive, but it was one of those you get to 3D print it and it comes apart, and it's great for a campaign or something that you might want to do. And I'd like to use it with DM Dave's Badge Quest. I think that would be a cool one to do with one of those stories there. And then I have also backed Ivory City on My Mini Factory, which is sort of like it's a platform for 3D printing enthusiasts. And so this is one of those where you get to basically print out a walled castled city, and I think that's intriguing to me.
Also awesome.
Yeah. So I backed that, and 3D printing is really not nearly as expensive. Backing them is not nearly as expensive as games, just because you're getting the STL files. I mean, obviously it's expensive when you're printing them out, as I'm learning, printing out the, I don't know if I mentioned before, I'm printing out a Hero Quest 3D game board.
Wow.
So I have, there was a guy, the Dragon Rest on Patreon, and he's got all the files, and you just back him at it's like $10 backing, and you can get access to his files, and you can download these and print them out. And it's taking a lot of time, and I have these little magnets that will go into the plastic so that you can pull you can interact the way you put it around, how you set up the floor and how you set up the walls. And because they're balls, the polarity just spins inside the plastic. And so you're not stuck one way or the other. And so it's really cool. It's a really interesting printing concept. So I thought, but that's also taking forever. It's like a day a plate. And so, and I'm taking a break right now. I've got a few more to get done, but I just needed a break.
Sure.
So yeah, but that's all I got going on right now.
That's all I got over here.
All right. Well, looks like you've got a busy travel week ahead of you.
We do.
Yeah. Well, I hope all that goes well, and please tell Sky I said hello, and look forward to
I'll do it, man.
Seeing them back on D&D very soon.
Yes.
And so that here concludes another episode of Lay It on the Table. You, of course, can follow us at layitonthetable.show, where you can find us on your favorite podcast platform. And if one of those platforms just happens to be Apple Podcasts, feel free to head on over there and leave us a like, or leave us a review and some stars, or just
5 stars. Is the good number of stars.
Tell us what you liked about the show. Tell us what I got wrong, because I'm sure it's always me. We'd love to know that, and we're always happy to be apologetic and about that. And as usual, you can find us our guild at Lay It on the Table at Board Game Geek, where you can also find a link to our podcast. And of course, we are on the YouTube channel at Geek and Southern, which is the overall umbrella channel for what we do here at layitonthetable.show. And as usual, I am Joe Mahaffey, and I am not bored. I am board gaming.
And I'm James Engelhardt, hoping that all your tiebreakers, but I'm going to just kill this because it's
You want us to do that again? Why don't you do that one more time?
The toddler was up early.
I think
I'm James Engelhardt, hoping that all your tiebreakers break your way. Damn it.
That's awesome. Hey, man, that's what you get for having a toddler at your age. Great. I'm going to get mail about being ageist. You're younger than me. All right.
1, 2,
Bye,
3,
everybody.
4.
Bye, y'all.